When I think about my life, I always believed I was living the dream, or at least my version of it. I married Emily 10 years ago, a woman who could light up a room just by walking into it. She had this effortless charm, the kind that made you feel lucky just to stand beside her. Together, we built what I thought was an unshakable foundation, a marriage full of love, trust, and respect. We weren't flashy people, but we had the kind of life that made others envy us. At least, that's what it looked like from the outside. Our two kids, Zoe and Ethan, are my pride and joy. Zoe, with her endless curiosity and love for drawing, and Ethan, who could spend hours building elaborate Lego castles, made every day worth it. Dinner at the table, Saturday morning soccer games, movie nights with popcorn, it was the kind of routine that felt comforting, like a warm blanket on a cold day. Emily and I were a team. She kept the home running while I worked long hours at a job I didn't love but knew was necessary to provide for our family. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours, and I believed we were happy. But looking back now, I see the cracks that were there all along, the small things you overlook because you don't want to believe there's something wrong. It started subtly, as these things often do. Emily had always been sociable, the type to strike up a conversation with anyone. She'd laugh at my quiet, analytical nature, saying I needed to loosen up. Not everyone is trying to solve a puzzle, Michael, she'd tease. I loved that about her. She was the spark, and I was the steady hand. We balanced each other. Then, slowly, the spark started feeling distant. At first, I thought it was just life catching up with us. We'd had our fair share of stresses, work deadlines, managing the kids' schedules, the occasional disagreement about money. Everyone has their moments, right? But there were these little changes in Emily that I couldn't quite put my finger on. She'd stay on her phone longer than usual, scrolling with this faint smile on her face. When I'd ask, "What's so funny?" she'd shrug and say, "Just a meme from work." Harmless enough. And then there were the late nights. Emily, who used to be in bed by 10 sharp, started staying up late in the living room. She'd say she needed time to unwind or that she'd gotten sucked into some show on Netflix. I didn't question it at first. After all, I was exhausted most nights myself, and honestly, who was I to say she couldn't have some time alone? But as the nights grew more frequent, I began to feel something, a quiet unease I couldn't explain. Even her presence felt different. Have you ever stood next to someone you love but felt like they were miles away? That's how it was with Emily. We'd talk, but our conversations became surface level. Kids, groceries, schedules. The deep, meaningful chats we used to have were replaced by quick exchanges of logistics. Did you pick up Zoe's art supplies? Or Ethan has a soccer game at 4. I told myself it was normal, just a phase. After all, we were both busy, right? Love changes over time, it matures, it doesn't always have to be fireworks. But then there were the moments when I caught her looking at me differently. I don't know how to describe it, except to say it felt like she wasn't really seeing me, like she was looking past me, through me. And every time I tried to address it, to ask if something was wrong, she'd smile this tight, dismissive smile and say, "I'm fine, Michael. You're overthinking again." And I believed her, or at least I wanted to believe her, because questioning her, questioning us, meant acknowledging the possibility that the life I thought we had wasn't as solid as I believed. It meant confronting fears I wasn't ready to face. So I let it slide. I convinced myself it was all in my head, that the stress of work was making me paranoid. Emily was my wife, my partner, the mother of my children. She wouldn't lie to me. She couldn't. Looking back, I see now that those cracks in our perfect facade weren't just cracks. They were warning signs, signs I ignored because I didn't want to believe what they were telling me. I had built my world around the idea that Emily and I were unshakable, that no matter what life threw at us, we'd face it together. It's funny, isn't it? How you can be so certain of something, so sure of its permanence, only to realize you were wrong all along. The truth was waiting just around the corner, and it was uglier than I ever could have imagined. You know that old saying, trust is like glass. Once it's broken, it's hard to fix? I never really appreciated the depth of that until I started to see cracks in mine. Trust wasn't just broken in my marriage, it was splintering into tiny, jagged shards that I didn't even know how to hold without cutting myself. It started with small things you could dismiss if you really wanted to, and believe me, I wanted to. For instance, Emily used to tell me everything. She had this way of over-explained her day down to the tiniest detail. I'd hear about how Zoe spilled juice on her drawing, how Ethan wanted spaghetti for dinner, but only if there were no weird vegetables, and even how the woman at the checkout line couldn't stop talking about the weather. But lately, her stories were becoming shorter, vague, distant. I'd ask, "How was your day?" And she'd shrug and say, "Busy as usual." No elaboration, no anecdotes, just that same flat response. At first, I thought maybe she's just tired. Who isn't? But it didn't sit right with me. Then there was the phone, that damn phone. I know we all spend too much time on our screens these days, but Emily had taken it to another level. She was always holding it, always scrolling, always texting. The sound of notifications became like a background track to her life. And here's the kicker. She started turning the screen away whenever I walked into the room. I'd say something like, "What's got you so focused?" And she'd give me that smile, that tight, dismissive smile that felt more like a shield than an answer. "Just work stuff," she'd say, or worse, nothing important. The first time I caught her laughing at her phone, I thought, well, good for her, she's having a moment of joy. But the second, third, fourth time, when she wouldn't share what was so funny, that's when the unease started to settle in my gut like a stone. I mean, I'm her husband. Why couldn't she just show me? And then there were the late nights. Emily had always been an early-to-bed kind of person. She used to say she couldn't function without her beauty sleep. But suddenly, she was staying up after I went to bed. I'd wake up in the middle of the night to find her on the couch, the glow of her phone lighting up her face. She'd look startled, almost guilty, like a kid caught sneaking candy. "What are you doing up?" I'd ask. "Just couldn't sleep," she'd reply. "Just couldn't sleep." That became her go-to excuse. And maybe it would have been believable if it didn't happen so often, if she wasn't so quick to put her phone down the moment I walked into the room, if she didn't look at me with this mix of pity and irritation, like I was some clueless fool asking stupid questions. Still, I tried to rationalize it. I told myself it was nothing, that I was being paranoid. After all, she was still Emily, right? She still made breakfast for the kids, still laughed at Ethan's bad jokes, still gave me a kiss before I left for work. But those kisses, they felt different, mechanical, like she was checking a box on some invisible list. Kiss husband. Smile, move on. The moment I really started to doubt, though, was when she began working late. Emily didn't have a job that required late hours. She worked part-time from home, managing social media accounts for a couple of small businesses. It wasn't exactly a high-pressure corporate gig. But suddenly, she had client meetings that kept her out until 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock at night. One night, I offered to pick her up. I thought it'd be a nice surprise. Maybe we could grab some ice cream on the way home like we used to. But when I called to let her know I was on my way, she sounded panicked. "Oh no, that's okay. I'm leaving. Don't worry about it." The tone in her voice wasn't relief. It was fear. And that fear, it planted something in me I couldn't ignore. I started noticing every little detail, like a detective piecing together a crime scene. The way she'd avoid eye contact when I asked about her day, the way her phone was always face down on the table. The way she'd hesitate before answering simple questions as if she needed a second to figure out what lie to tell. It wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was certainty, growing stronger every day. I just didn't have proof, not yet. And maybe deep down, I didn't want proof, because once you have proof, there's no going back. Once you know, you can't unknow. And I wasn't sure I was ready for that, not yet, not with everything at stake. But the cracks in our marriage, weren't going away. They were only getting wider, and I knew it was only a matter of time before everything fell apart. The question wasn't if, it was when. It was a Tuesday night when the line between doubt and confirmation finally blurred. Tuesdays were always quiet in our house. The kids were in bed by 8:30, and Emily and I usually spent the evening in the living room, her reading or scrolling through her phone while I caught up on emails or sports highlights. It had become our routine, one of those silent rituals of married life where companionship doesn't always require words. But that night was different. Emily was glued to her phone again, but it wasn't just the usual scrolling. She was smiling. No, she was glowing. A kind of lightness radiated from her, the kind I hadn't seen in years. It wasn't the smile she gave me when I cracked a bad joke or when the kids did something silly. It was private, like the kind of smile meant for someone else. And that someone wasn't me. I couldn't help myself. What's so funny? I asked, trying to sound casual, even playful. She looked up, startled, her thumb freezing mid-scroll. Oh, nothing, she said quickly, her tone a little too breezy. Then she put her phone face down on the couch beside her, the way she always did now, as if shielding its contents from prying eyes. My eyes. It was such a small thing, but it hit me hard. That phone had become her world, her confidant, her escape. And the way she guarded it, you'd think it held state secrets. I tried to let it go, to push the growing knot in my chest down where I couldn't feel it. But I couldn't, not anymore. Later that night, as Emily slept soundly beside me, I found myself staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. I told myself for weeks, months even, that I was imagining things, that I was overthinking, as she liked to say. But deep down, I knew the truth was there, just out of reach, taunting me. And I had to know. I got out of bed and quietly reached for her phone on the nightstand. I wasn't proud of it. Spying on your spouse isn't exactly the foundation of a healthy marriage. But I felt like a drowning man grasping for a lifeline. I needed answers, no matter how ugly they might be. The screen lit up, and there it was, Nathan's name. Dozens of messages, their thread pinned to the top of her chat list like a badge of importance. My stomach dropped as I began to read. Can't wait to see you again tomorrow. You always make me laugh. No one gets me like you do. That dress you wore today, wow. Each message felt like a punch to the gut, knocking the air out of me. I scrolled further, my hands trembling. There were inside jokes I didn't understand, compliments I hadn't heard in years, and moments of intimacy that didn't belong to me anymore. It wasn't explicit. There were no confessions of love or inappropriate pictures. But the tone was unmistakable. This wasn't just a friendship. This was a connection, a bond, an emotional intimacy she had no right to share with someone else. I sat there staring at the screen, my mind spinning. How long had this been going on? Was it just words, or had it crossed into something more? I didn't know, and I wasn't sure I wanted to. What I did know was that I was no longer the person she turned to when she needed to laugh, to vent, to feel understood. Nathan had taken that place. The next morning, I confronted her. I couldn't keep it in any longer. Emily, I said, holding up her phone, do you want to tell me what this is? Her eyes widened, a mix of shock and anger flashing across her face. You went through my phone, she snapped, snatching it from my hand. How dare you invade my privacy? That's what you're upset about? I shot back. Not the fact that you're sharing intimate conversations with another man? She tried to brush it off. It's not what you think. Nathan is just a friend. We talk, we joke, that's all. Just a friend. I repeated, my voice rising. Do you send all your friends messages about how much you can't wait to see them? About how no one gets you like they do? Her face turned red, and for a moment, she didn't respond. Then she said the words that would haunt me for days. You don't understand, Michael. I needed someone to talk to, someone who listens. That was the moment I realized it wasn't just about Nathan. It was about us, or rather, the version of us that had slowly eroded over time. She felt something was missing, and instead of working with me to fix it, she'd found someone else to fill the void, someone who wasn't her husband. I wanted to scream, to shout, to demand answers, but instead, I walked away. Not because I was calm, but because I was scared of what I might say, scared of what she might admit, scared that our perfect facade was crumbling, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. I thought I had seen the worst of it. The lies, the texts, the late nights. But I hadn't, not by a long shot. If there's one thing I'll never forget, it's that day at the park, the day everything came crashing down in the most humiliating, infuriating, and gut-wrenching way possible. It was supposed to be a simple family outing, just me, Emily, and the kids. Zoe had been begging to try out her new kite, and Ethan wanted to show off his soccer skills. I thought it would be a good chance to reconnect, to remind Emily of what we had, what we'd built together. I had this naive hope that maybe, just maybe, we could salvage what was left of us. We packed a picnic, loaded up the car, and headed to the park. The kids were thrilled, running ahead to the open field while Emily and I sat up on a blanket under a tree. She seemed distracted, her eyes darting to her phone every few minutes. I bit my tongue, determined not to let my frustration ruin the day for the kids' sake. I told myself, always for the kids. I should have known something was off when Emily kept glancing around like she was expecting someone, but I didn't want to make a scene, not here, not now. So I stayed quiet, even as my gut churned with unease. And then, as if summoned by some invisible force, he showed up. Nathan, strolling across the park like he owned the place, his smug grin plastered across his face. My heart sank as I watched Emily's eyes light up, a reaction she hadn't given me in years. She stood up as he approached, her body language shifting in a way that made my blood boil. She wasn't just happy to see him, she was excited. "Hey," Nathan called out, his voice loud enough to draw attention. He greeted Zoe and Ethan like they were old friends, ruffling Ethan's hair and complimenting Zoe's kite. My kids, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me, giggled and chatted with him like he was some kind of hero. I stood up, my fists clenched at my sides. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my tone sharp. Nathan didn't miss a beat. "Emily mentioned you'd be here. Thought I'd stop by and say hi." Emily looked flustered, but she didn't deny it. She didn't even meet my eyes. I felt the last shred of my patience snap. "This is a family outing," I said, my voice low and steady, though my hands were trembling. "You're not part of this family." Nathan raised his hands in mock surrender. "Whoa, easy there. Just being friendly." Friendly. The word tasted bitter in my mouth. Friendly didn't explain the late-night texts, the secret meetings, the way my wife seemed to orbit around him like a planet caught in his gravitational pull. Then it happened, the moment that turned my simmering anger into a full-blown eruption. Nathan turned to Emily, completely ignoring me, and said, "You're looking stunning today, as always." And before I could process what was happening, he leaned in, right in front of the kids, like he was about to kiss her. "Don't you dare." I growled, but it was too late. His lips brushed her cheek, and something inside me snapped. I didn't think. I just reacted. My fist connected with his jaw before I even realized I'd moved. The sound of the impact was sickening, a dull crack that echoed in the air. Nathan stumbled back, clutching his face, and for a moment, There was silence. Then chaos. Emily screamed, grabbing my arm and shouting, "What are you doing, Michael?" The kids stared in shock, their kite and soccer ball forgotten. Nathan straightened, his face twisted in pain and anger, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. "You're insane," he spat, his words slurred. "I'm calling the cops." "Call whoever you want," I shot back, my voice shaking with rage, "but stay the hell away from my wife and my kids." Emily's expression was a mix of fury and panic. "You've embarrassed all of us," she hissed, her eyes darting around at the growing crowd of onlookers. People were recording, whispering, pointing. My family outing had turned into a public spectacle, and I felt the weight of every single pair of eyes on me. But I didn't care, not in that moment. All I could think about was how Nathan had crossed the line, how Emily had let him, and how my kids had to witness the fallout. My fists were still clenched, my breathing ragged, as I watched Nathan stumble away, muttering threats under his breath. Emily turned to me, her face pale with anger. "You've ruined everything," she said, her voice trembling. "Everything." I wanted to yell back, to tell her that she was the one who had ruined us, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I stood there, watching as she gathered the kids and walked away, leaving me alone in the middle of the park, surrounded by strangers who didn't know the half of it. In that moment, I realized something. No matter how much I loved her, no matter how much I wanted to fix things, we had crossed a line we could never come back from. And it wasn't just Nathan's jaw that had broken that day, it was the last fragile thread of our marriage. I wish I could tell you that the fight at the park ended it, that it brought clarity, that it forced Emily to realize what was at stake. I wish I could say we went home, had one of those dramatic conversations you see in movies, and figured out where to go from there. But life isn't a movie, and what followed was nothing short of a slow, excruciating unraveling. The police showed up about an hour after the incident. I was still sitting on the park bench, staring at the ground, replaying the punch in my mind like it was on an endless loop. The sound of Nathan's jaw cracking, the crowd gasping, Emily screaming, every detail was burned into my memory. "Sir, we need to talk," one of the officers said, pulling me out of my thoughts. Emily had called them, or maybe Nathan did. I didn't even care at that point. They asked me questions, took statements, and gave me a long lecture about public altercations. Nathan, of course, played the victim, holding an ice pack to his jaw and milking the attention for all it was worth. "He attacked me unprovoked," he said, his words slurred. Unprovoked? The audacity of that man. They didn't arrest me. Not right then at least, but I could tell it wasn't over. Nathan made it clear he planned to press charges, and Emily's silence during the whole ordeal spoke louder than any words ever could. She didn't defend me. She didn't say a single thing to explain why I'd done what I did. She just stood there, holding the kids, looking at me like I was a stranger. The drive home was the quietest it had ever been. Zoe and Ethan sat in the back seat, their faces pale, their eyes darting nervously between me and Emily. I wanted to say something to them, to tell them that everything was going to be okay, but how could I? I didn't even believe it myself. When we got home, Emily finally broke the silence. "What were you thinking, Michael?" she hissed the moment the kids were out of earshot. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" "What I've done?" I shot back, my voice rising. "Are you kidding me right now? Did you even see what he tried to do? He had no business being there, Emily, and he had no right." I stopped myself, my fists clenching as the memory of Nathan leaning in to kiss her flashed through my mind. I wasn't going to stand there and let him disrespect me. Disrespect us. "Disrespect us," she repeated, her voice dripping with disbelief. "You think you're the victim here? You just humiliated me, Michael, in front of everyone. You made a scene, and now the kids." Her voice cracked, and for a moment, I thought she might cry, But she didn't. She just shook her head, her expression hardening. You've ruined everything. Ruined everything. That was the moment I realized she wasn't upset about Nathan. She wasn't angry at him for crossing the line, or even at herself for letting it happen. She was angry at me because, in her mind, I was the problem. Not her behavior, not the late nights or the texts or the lies, just me. The kids, of course, were the collateral damage. Zoe wouldn't look at me for the rest of the night, and Ethan asked me if I was going to jail. Nobody. I told him, forcing a smile I didn't feel. I'm not going anywhere. But even as I said the words, I wasn't sure they were true. The next few days were a blur. Nathan, true to his word, filed a police report. I got a call from the station asking me to come in for questioning. I spent hours in a cramped room, explaining my side of the story to a detective who looked like he'd heard it all before. Domestic disputes are messy, he said, barely looking up from his notepad. But throwing punches in public isn't the answer. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell him that this wasn't just some petty argument, that Nathan had crossed a line no man should ever cross. But what was the point? The law didn't care about pride or respect or betrayal. All they saw was a man who threw a punch and another man with a broken jaw. At home, things were no better. Emily and I barely spoke. When we did, it was tense and clipped, like two people forced to share the same space but desperate to be anywhere else. She refused to talk about Nathan, about the texts, about what had happened at the park. You can't keep blaming him for everything, she said at one point, her voice cold. You need to take a hard look at yourself, Michael. Take a hard look at myself? That was rich, coming from her. But as much as I wanted to fire back, to tell her exactly what I thought of her and her so-called friend, I couldn't do it. Not with Zoe and Ethan upstairs, their world already fragile enough. So I stayed quiet. I stayed quiet and waited for the storm to pass. But deep down, I knew this wasn't a storm you could wait out. This was the kind of storm that left nothing but wreckage in its wake, and I had no idea how to pick up the pieces. I always thought I had a high tolerance for pain, not the physical kind, but the emotional kind. Life throws its punches, and you learn to roll with them. I thought that was what I was doing, enduring everything for the sake of my marriage, my family, and the life we'd built. But there's a limit to how much anyone can take, and that limit has a way of sneaking up on you. For me, it came in the quiet hours after the park incident, when the chaos settled but the damage remained. I couldn't sleep. I'd lie in bed staring at the ceiling, the events of the past few days replaying in my mind like a broken record. Emily's words echoed louder than anything else. You've ruined everything. It wasn't just what she said. It was how she said it, like I was the villain in this story, like I was the one who had betrayed her trust and not the other way around. I tried to convince myself that her anger was just deflection, a way to avoid owning up to her mistakes. But a part of me couldn't shake the possibility that maybe she really believed it. Maybe in her mind, I was the problem. Maybe she'd been telling herself that for a long time, slowly rewriting the narrative of our marriage until I was the bad guy who drove her into someone else's arms. The worst part was that she didn't even seem sorry. Sure, she'd said she never meant for things to get out of hand, but those weren't words of remorse. They were words of inconvenience. She wasn't upset that she'd hurt me. She was upset that I'd exposed the crack she was trying so hard to keep hidden. Every conversation we had felt like walking through a minefield. I tried to bring up the texts, the late nights, Nathan's inappropriate behavior, but she'd shut it down every time. We've talked about this, Michael, she'd say, exasperated. How many times do I have to tell you? There's nothing going on. Nothing going on? I couldn't count how many times I'd heard that phrase. It had become her mantra, a shield to deflect every question, every accusation, every plea for honesty. And every time she said it, it chipped away at what little trust one had left. One night, after the kids had gone to bed, I decided I couldn't hold it in any longer. "Emily," I said, my voice steady but firm, "we need to talk. Really talk. No excuses, no deflecting. I need answers." She sighed, not even looking up from her laptop. "I don't know what you want me to say, Michael. We've been over this." "I want the truth," I said, my frustration bubbling to the surface. "I want to know why you think it's okay to prioritize someone else over your own family. I want to know why you let him into our lives, why you let him." I stopped myself, my throat tightening. "Why you let him treat you like his wife instead of mine?" That got her attention. She closed the laptop and looked at me, her expression unreadable. "I needed someone to talk to," she said after a long pause. "Someone who listens. Someone who doesn't just go through the motions." "Go through the motions?" I repeated, my voice rising. "Do you have any idea what I've been going through? Do you know how hard I've been trying to hold this family together while you—" I stopped, shaking my head. "No, of course you don't, because you've been too busy hiding behind Nathan to notice." Her eyes narrowed, and for a moment, I thought she might fight back, throw my words back at me. But instead, she just shook her head. "You don't get it," she said quietly. "You never have." And that was it. The moment I realized we weren't just fighting about Nathan or the texts or the park incident. We were fighting about something deeper, something that had been festering for years. We were fighting about a marriage that had lost its foundation, about two people who had drifted so far apart they no longer recognized each other. I felt the weight of it all pressing down on me, suffocating me. The betrayal, the lies, the constant gaslighting, it was too much. I couldn't keep pretending that this was just a rough patch we could work through. I couldn't keep sacrificing my dignity for the sake of a marriage that was already broken. That night, as I lay in bed beside her, the distance between us felt like a chasm. I stared at the ceiling, my heart pounding, and for the first time, I let myself consider the possibility that maybe this was the end. Maybe love wasn't enough to fix what had been shattered. Maybe it was time to stop fighting for something that no longer existed. You know that moment when someone offers an apology, and instead of feeling relief, you feel insulted, like they're throwing a bucket of water on a house that's already burned to the ground? That's what it felt like when Emily finally decided to apologize, if you could even call it that. It happened about a week after the park incident. By then, the silence between us had become unbearable. We weren't just avoiding conversations, we were avoiding each other entirely, passing each other in the hallway like strangers, barely saying more than a word at a time. The kids noticed, of course. Zoe asked me why Mommy and Daddy weren't talking. Ethan just looked at me with those big, worried eyes that made me feel like the worst father in the world. I'd been sitting in the living room that evening, flipping through TV channels without really watching anything, when Emily walked in. She stood there for a moment, like she was trying to decide whether to speak or leave. Finally, she sat down on the far end of the couch, as far away from me as she could without being in another room. "I've been thinking," she started, her voice quiet, "about everything." I didn't say anything. I just waited, unsure if I even wanted to hear what she had to say. "I'm sorry," she said after a long pause. "I didn't mean for things to get this bad. I didn't mean to hurt you." It took me a moment to respond. "Didn't mean to hurt me?" I repeated, my voice sharper than I intended. "Emily, you didn't just hurt me. You betrayed me. You lied to me. You invited another man into our lives, into our kids' lives, and you're sitting here telling me you didn't mean for things to get bad." She flinched, but her expression hardened. "You don't understand, Michael. It wasn't like that." "Then explain it to me." I snapped. "Tell me what it was like, because from where I'm sitting, it looks a lot like you prioritized Nathan over our marriage, over our family." She sighed, shaking her head. "It wasn't about Nathan. It was about everything else. You and me. The way things have been for years." I needed someone to talk to, someone who made me feel seen. Seen? I repeated, my stomach twisting. You're telling me you turned to him because I didn't make you feel seen? Do you have any idea what it's been like for me? Watching you pull away, watching you lie to my face, watching you let another man step into a role that was supposed to be mine. Emily's gaze dropped to her lap. I didn't mean for it to happen, she said again. I didn't know how to talk to you anymore. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered all the times I tried to reach out to her, to talk to her, to fix things before they got this bad. And every single time, she'd shut me down, deflected, lied. And now she wanted to blame me for not seeing her, for not trying hard enough. I'm done, I said finally, my voice quiet but firm. I'm done trying to fix something you clearly didn't care enough to fight for. You say you're sorry, but you're not sorry for what you did. You're sorry you got caught. You're sorry things got messy. But you're not sorry for betraying me. You're not sorry for letting Nathan into our lives. That's not fair, she said, her voice trembling. You're not perfect, Michael. You've made mistakes too. Maybe I have, I said, but I didn't invite someone else into our marriage. I didn't lie to your face. I didn't put our kids in the middle of this mess. She didn't respond. She just sat there, staring at the floor, while the weight of everything we weren't saying hung in the air between us. After a while, she stood up and walked out of the room, leaving me alone on the couch. And that was it. Her big attempt at reconciliation, a half-hearted apology that felt more like an excuse than a genuine acknowledgement of what she'd done. No promises to change, no effort to rebuild what was broken, just an admission that she didn't mean for things to get bad. I sat there for a long time after she left, thinking about all the years we'd spent together, all the memories we'd built, all the plans we'd made for the future. And for the first time, I realized that none of it mattered anymore. Because a marriage without trust, without honesty, without respect, it's not a marriage. It's just two people living in the same house, pretending everything's fine when it's anything but. And I couldn't pretend anymore. The moment I decided to leave wasn't dramatic. There was no shouting match, no grand confrontation. It was quiet, eerily so. I was sitting in the kitchen, staring at my untouched cup of coffee, listening to the sound of Emily moving around upstairs. She was getting ready for the day, humming softly to herself like nothing had changed, like we weren't living in the ruins of a marriage that once meant everything to me. I had spent weeks trying to hold on, trying to convince myself that we could somehow fix this. But every effort, every conversation, every fleeting moment of hope had been met with a wall built of deflection, denial, and half-hearted apologies. Emily didn't see the cracks in our marriage the way I did, or maybe she saw them and just didn't care enough to do anything about them. The kids were my only anchor. Zoe and Ethan didn't deserve this. They didn't deserve to grow up in a home filled with tension, where their parents barely spoke to each other and their father walked on eggshells every day. I realized that staying wasn't saving them, it was hurting them. They deserved better, even if that meant their parents weren't together anymore. So I made the decision. I packed a bag, just enough to get me through a few days, and left it by the door. When Emily came downstairs and saw it, her expression didn't register shock. It was more like resignation, as if she'd known this was coming all along. "You're leaving," she said, her voice flat. It wasn't a question. "I am," I replied. My voice was calm, but inside, I was anything but. "I can't do this anymore, Emily. I've tried. God knows I've tried. But this, whatever this is, it's not a marriage. It's not something I can live with." She didn't argue. She didn't beg me to stay. She just nodded, her eyes darting to the bag like it was some kind of confirmation. "What about the kids?" she asked quietly. "I'll come back to see them," I said. "I'm not abandoning them, Emily. I'm leaving because I love them, because I can't be the father they need while I'm stuck in this mess." She didn't respond, and that silence, that cold, empty silence, was all the confirmation I needed. This wasn't just the end of our marriage. It was the end of us as anything more than two people co-parenting from a distance. The first night alone was the hardest. I found a small motel on the edge of town, the kind of place you only stay in when you're desperate. The room was cramped, the bed uncomfortable, and the air conditioning rattled all night. But for the first time in months, I felt something close to peace. No tension, no arguments, no unspoken resentment hanging in the air. Just me and my thoughts. The next few weeks were a blur of logistics. Finding a place to live, sorting out custody arrangements, trying to explain the situation to Zoe and Ethan without breaking their hearts. I hated seeing the confusion in their eyes, hearing Zoe ask why I couldn't just fix it and make everything go back to normal. Ethan, always quieter, just hugged me and said, "I love you, Daddy." Those words nearly broke me, but I kept going. I found a small apartment not far from the kids' school, close enough to stay involved in their lives. I threw myself into my work, not because I loved it, but because it was a distraction. And slowly, bit by bit, I started to rebuild. It wasn't easy. The loneliness was crushing at times. I missed the kids more than I thought possible. And even though I knew leaving was the right decision, I couldn't help but feel like I'd failed, like I hadn't done enough to save my family. But then I'd remind myself, staying would have been the real failure. Staying would have meant sacrificing my dignity, my sanity, and the chance for a better future for me and for my kids. The first time I truly felt like I could breathe again was during one of my weekends with Zoe and Ethan. We were at the park, ironically, the same park where everything had fallen apart. But this time, there was no tension, no unwanted visitors, no simmering anger threatening to boil over. Just me and my kids, laughing, playing, and enjoying the kind of simple, honest joy I'd almost forgotten was possible. Zoe looked up at me at one point, her face flushed from running around. "You seem happy, Daddy," she said, like really happy. And for the first time in a long time, I realized she was right. I was happy. Not because everything was perfect, it wasn't, but because I was finally free. Free from the lies, the betrayal, the endless cycle of trying to fix something that was beyond repair. Emily and I still spoke, of course. We had to, for the kids' sake. But our conversations were brief, transactional, and devoid of the emotional weight they used to carry. I didn't hate her, not anymore. I pitied her, in a way, pity for what she'd lost, for what she'd thrown away. But I didn't dwell on it. That part of my life was over. And as I watched Zoe and Ethan chase each other around the park, their laughter filling the air, I realized something else. Endings aren't always bad. Sometimes they're necessary. Sometimes they're the only way to find a new beginning.